Check the mic and make sure it sound right.
So welcome everyone to the group chat brought to you by Overmark. I'm your host Darrell, and today with me is Wen, Overmark's Emath and Amath tutor. So we'll be talking more about how do you ace your Emath and Amath and how do you do well, So without further ado, maybe let me have Wen introduce himself.
Hi everyone, so I'm Wen. I'm the Emath and Amath tutor for Overmark. So a little bit about myself. So I'm currently an undergrad in NTU. I'm moving on to my third year next year, and I study mathematics in NTU. So I've always loved mathematics since from a really, really young age. So I always knew that I always wanted to become a tutor, and I always wanted to teach math. Actually, this is the peaking point of my Amath. When I first learned Amath was actually when I fell really, really in love with mathematics, and I knew that is honestly a direction that I wanted to head on towards for the rest of my life. Yeah, so that's a bit about myself.
Maybe you can just share very briefly with our listeners, what is it like to study mathematics in university? Because even I myself am not too sure.
Okay, so what I study in uni, so basically what we learn is like calculus, linear algebra, then statistics, and we go into like really, really detail into all those kind of stuff. And then after that, I get to choose my specialization, which is pure math. So what I study is more of like the theoretical side of things, and like I understand like what is knots and surfaces. I do learn complex numbers, like those really, really chim things, which I honestly love. And I really do enjoy studying those kind of things. So yeah, that's what I study in math. It's completely different from what the current O levels and A level syllabus is. It's honestly like a really deep dive down into the vast ocean of mathematics. Yeah.
All right, man. I kind of don't want to know more about that. Okay. Anyway, I think for our listeners, today the discussion is really surrounded on how can we do better in math. Can't emphasize how important math is. It's like a compulsory subject in your O-level tabulation. So you kind of have to do well for math, regardless of whether you're taking only Emath or both Emath and Amath. So maybe I'll just get you to share a bit more about the syllabus for both of them, and maybe you can point out some differences between the two.
Okay, sure. So let me start with Emath first, as Emath is a subject where everyone is actually taking. So Emath is actually broken down into three main cores. So this is what I like to use a terminology called core. So it's basically like an overarching kind of name to all the categories underneath. So we start off with numbers and algebra. So algebra is already a really very important in the student's career in mathematics. And then we move on to geometry and measurement. Then the last one will be statistics. So if you ask me personally, some of the more important topics in there will be algebra, especially, and I know for a fact that many students are not actually very, very good in algebra, but algebra actually works wonders and is actually really, really very important as you move on into your other subjects in the future or when you move on past secondary school education. So algebra is honestly like a really, really very important milestone that everyone needs to cross and needs to reach. So that is one of them. And another one is actually the geometry measurements section, where it's like mensuration, where you have like your graphing topics, your angles, your properties of circles. All these kind of chapters are really, really very important. Why? Because they give you a more real life kind of perspective towards things. Like it's a really that's why there's a chapter called applications in a practical world context or something along those lines, where you actually go into really a lot of detail. How do you use mathematics in real life? So I think that is one thing that a lot of students are asking. Like, those memes where you see like, there's for example, the quadratic formula on the board, then people is like, when is the next time I'll ever use that past secondary school or past learning that formula? So actually, honestly, those kind of tools are really, really very important. You will actually need them. Like for example, when you order cai fan from your auntie, you need the math to count how much money you need, right? Or next time, for example, when you borrow money from a bank, you want to see which bank gives you the best interest rate. So that's when your compound interest, your simple interest actually to come in. Or for example, like another very simple example, my friend recently asked me like how to measure a length of an arc because he wanted to buy curtains and he couldn't measure. So he asked me to help him figure out like the area and everything. So honestly, these are things where you will use them in life. So this is where the Emath syllabus actually do come in. So let me move on to the Amath syllabus. So the Amath syllabus actually splits up into, again, the three cores. So we'll start off first with the algebra section, where you will do like binomial theorem, you will do logarithms, you will do exponential, all this kind of stuff. Then you will move on to geometry and trigonometry. So that is where you will see the very, very heavy chapter of trigo, and you will see like linear law, you will see coordinate geom, you will see properties of in plane geom, and then the last chapter will be calculus. So I know for a fact that a lot of students do not like calculus, a lot of students hate trigo to the core, and a lot of students hate logarithms to the core. And that is like the one chapter in each of these very cores, which is very sad because I know for a fact that these topics are very, very difficult. But I do have techniques for them, and I do know how to help you guys in them. So that one, we can talk about them later. So what is the main difference between Emath and Amath? Amath is really like going really in detail, a little bit more in detail compared to Emath. So for example, we teach you like gradient of a line, tangent, normal, rate of change for calculus, and like we teach you like how to prove circles, how to use the properties to prove like certain geometrical figures. And like, for example, the algebra topics, we teach you exponential to talk about like, let's say the rate of increase of bacterial growth, or like the price inflation or something. All these kind of things actually do require the Amath syllabus and requires a little bit more of the mathematical knowledge. That's why there's a very big difference between Emath and Amath.
I mean, I wouldn't. I mean, obviously, I took Emath and Amath, but I didn't really. I mean, I'm not an expert like you, lah, because I'm not teaching math, so it's been a while for me. But I think between the two, for me, I always found Emath to be easier. But just to put a bit of context between the difference between the two, right, is that Emath, right, almost everyone, if I'm not wrong, everyone will have to take Emath at O levels. So if you're looking at in terms of the bell curve and everything, I think scoring an A1 is not the easiest because of the sheer amount of competition you're facing. But for Amath, not everybody takes it. So sometimes you can look at it both ways. Because lesser people take it, it might be easier to score. But then again, it's also those that are better at math that takes Amath. So it makes Amath just as equally as difficult. But if you're planning to go to JC, you will be taking math. And if you're doing so, it's almost paramount for you to take Amath because a lot of the JC math concept is built upon what you learn in Amath. Less so in Emath, except for maybe the statistics bit, if I remember that correctly. So if you're planning to go to a JC or you are 90% sure you're going to do so, never ever give up on your Amath because it's going to be super important. I think, Kaiwan, just now earlier you shared like there's a couple of more difficult topics that students tend to struggle. So I think my follow-up question to that would be, can you provide some tips, okay, in terms of how students can really work on those particular chapters, as well as in general, what's the approach that they can do to really improve their math?
So actually, before I start on the tips thing, I actually want to talk a little bit about something you mentioned earlier, which was the bell curve. So I know this is something that is very scary to a lot of people. Like you see, like what pray to the bell curve God and everything. I mean, it's very true for Emath especially because I understand that the bell curve for Emath is ridiculous. So this is what I tell my students: if you want to score an A for A1 for paper one for Emath, you need to score at least 76, 77 out of 80 for the paper one. So that means the maximum you can get is 2 marks worth of careless mistakes. So that is how scary it is. For paper two, I usually tell students to do about 94, 95 out of 100. And wow, that is honestly very scary. But yes, there are students out there that can easily get full marks for both papers. So that is the kind of competition that you're facing against. And what you say is true for Amath. So not many students take Amath. So usually the stronger students will continue on taking Amath. So your bell curve will also be there because so this is a really very controversial thing. But to me personally, I feel that Amath is easier than Emath. Why? Because Amath questions are very standard. So this is what I teach my students to actually look at the question, right? And on the spot, like you just snap a finger, you can tell what topic, you can tell what method straight away. So that is actually some of the tips that I'm going to share later. But for Emath are phrased in a more, let's say, more funny way and not very like common compared to A. A is a very standard kind of template. E has like a little bit of changes. Sometimes they change the words, then questions become very complicated, that kind of thing. But for A, right, it's just, gradient, normal, okay, -1. That's all you need to do. As simple as that. That's why I personally feel that Amath is more easier for me. Okay, so let me move on to talking about the tips for both Emath and Amath. So let me start with Emath first. So some of the more difficult topics out there that I know of from my students. So number one will be algebra. So we're talking about the factorization chapter, the expansion chapter, especially the fractions of algebra. So okay, this is something that I did last time with my own tuition teacher last time. So, okay, it's going to sound ridiculous because when I told my own students, they also say like, really? Yeah. Okay, so this is what I did last time. Last time when I started off with math, my algebra wasn't good at all. Was also, I had struggled like trying to figure out like what to do and everything. Right now, I just snap my finger and I know straight away what method to use. Okay, so what I actually personally do last time is that every single day, every night, I will take about 50 questions and I'll just do and do every single night until it becomes a point where it becomes very standard, and it becomes like, okay, I see this fraction before, I know how to do it. Oh, I see this quadratic equation, this is how to do it. This is what I impart to my students. Once you are able to look at the question, you'll snap your fingers, straight away answer come out, and you know what is the method to do. And then now the method is just about just leading up to the answer, which is of course question to question. But the initial identification of the question is super important. And this is why in my curated notes, what I actually do is that I classify my notes based on like the variants out there, the very, very common type of questions. So I tell students to watch out for this particular term, to watch out for this particular denominator. When you see this denominator, it's automatically this method. And that is for the algebra topic. Okay, so move on. Another very difficult topic that I know students struggle in is properties of circle, congruency, similarity. So these two chapters are more of like whether you can see or you cannot see. So as a tutor, personally, this is what I tell my students. It's either you see it or you don't. Because it cannot be during the exams, right? You look at the question. If you really cannot see it, you flip all the way to the end and you go back to the question, you look at it again, you still cannot see. And then, you really cannot do the question. It's really all about the techniques of seeing and identifying those very unique shapes, like the butterfly, the quadrilateral in the circle, all those kind of very unique things that will stick out to you. And there's actually a certain memorization technique that I teach students to trace and to actually follow to get the answers out. So that is more of like my methods of solving those kind of questions. Then another difficult topic will be trigo. So I know trigo is another topic where like everyone see trigo like bearings, see shortest distance, and like very long questions, very disgusting. No, trust me, trigo is actually the best. Why? Because the 10 marks there are very standard. So every question always starts off with cosine rule, sine rule, area of triangle, shortest distance, bearing, standard one. So I teach my students to just, once you see that certain term, straight away method come out and you'll be able to do. This is what I do. So everything has like, I call it algorithm. So it's more of like understanding how to apply the correct process, correct algorithm at that process. Okay.
Just taking a segue here, just to do a bit of a sum up of what you were sharing. I think among those difficult topics, I think something that really stood out to me, even for my time when I was a student, is that the practice aspect of math, right? You cannot run away from it. I think the practice is not so much just pure volume, but it's the volume that gives you the awareness of the different question variants. So the more you expose yourself to a certain way a certain math concept can be tested, and once you have seen it through, right, you kind of realize that there's actually only a certain way that the concept can be tested. So once you're comfortable with those ways on how questions are being set, then what's left for you to do is just to work out the workings itself. And then I think for things like, like when we go back to talk about like properties of circle, or we are talking about angles and stuff like that, the whether you can see or cannot see, I think a lot of it is also dependent on how much you have seen, right? Because if you haven't seen it before and it's your first time seeing it in the exam, likely you won't be able to spot it. Okay. But let's say you did the practices, you put in the work, you tried your prelim, your TYS papers, and you have seen a similar way of how it's being set, then you kind of know, okay, now this is how I've learned this before. And then when you see it again, then you reapply that knowledge. That's when you start affirming and building your understanding from within. Then from then on, you can never really unlearn it. It's a bit like learning how to swim or learning how to ride a bicycle. At the start, you will make a lot of mistakes because you don't know how to do it. But once you get the hang of it, I believe that after which it really comes naturally. Like you cannot forget like how to solve a quadratic equation because it's just like that. So I think for math, right, I think just to provide a bit of my own perspective as a student last time was that the practice really helped. I think for me, I remembered that by Sec 4 mid-year, I was still failing my Emath pretty badly. Yeah, but I used the June holidays. I went back to school. My teacher was giving remedials. And honestly, she didn't teach much. But it was really through the practices that she gave, right? The very specific selected questions that she chose that showed me the different ways of doing my logarithm or teaching me how to differentiate, integrate in very particular situations. And then after I got the hang of it, right, naturally by prelims, I was already at the A2. Because it's once you get that level of understanding and enlightenment on how to solve those questions, right, you won't go back already, because that's not knowledge that you can forget. So I think just to go back onto the point on like whether you get it or not, I think a lot of it has to do with your preparation. It's not so much on that day itself. You go into the exam hall, you see whether your luck is there, the bell curve goes in your favor. I don't think so. I think math has a lot to do with preparation, and the more prepared you are, the better you put yourself in a position to succeed. Okay. Now moving on to Amath, then can you share with us what are the more difficult topics and how should students approach them?
Okay, so for Emath, right, I believe just now I mentioned at the start, like 3 of the main chunks of topics that a lot of students struggle in. So number 1 will be logarithms and exponential. So this is a chapter where I know a lot of students cannot do, because it's another thing. It's about whether you see it or you cannot see it. So same thing, you need to practice. Logarithm questions, the beauty of logarithm questions is that there's actually a standard and a very fixed type of questions out there. There is only how much a question can change. And if you're able to identify those kind of little subtle changes, you'll be able to work out what ways you actually need to solve these kind of logarithm questions. So that is one. Number 2 will be the trigo chapter. So I know, wow, this is another chapter that a lot of people hate. So especially because trigo is split up into the 3 chunks: the sketching of the graph, the proving of the identity, and the solving of the trigo equation. Okay, so to me personally, the easiest is the solving of the trigo equation. Why? Because it's all very logical. So whenever they give you an equation, so for example, let's say they have a secant and a tangent in the equation, it's very obvious that the secant needs to change to the tangent, or the tangent needs to change to the secant. Because very, very rare in the O levels, they will actually give you like multiple changes in a certain question. It's very rare. So just need to know, just need to observe whatever is given to you and just apply the relevant formula. That's for solving a trigo equation. Then the behind part about the ASTC rule, the basic angle, all those are really very simple, very same thing, algorithm type. You just need to memorize the ways to doing it, just know what you are looking for, and you'll be able to get the answers. It's very, very difficult to actually skew away from this algorithm. Okay, so we move on to identities. So I know for a fact that identities is something that many students hate because they just cannot see it. And I know that identities is something that you cannot practice for. Why? Because there's so many versions out there. There's so many different types, and it's not possible to practice for every single variant. Not possible. So what I suggest for this kind of identities thing, just practice. Just practice really those 100 variants and everything. Because the little changes that you do between the formulas, or like the little like double angle formula, addition formulas that you use, right, will actually come in again. Maybe not in the same way, but in a similar way. And then always observe like what is your goal. This is what I tell my students. Ask yourself, what do you want to achieve at the end? What is your goal for the question? If let's say, for example, if the final angle is a secant, so you know that you need a 1 over cosine. So you write it at the corner to yourself, 1 over cosine. So you tell yourself, okay, denominator must have a cosine. You force the cosine to the denominator and you'll get your answer. This is how I teach my students to do it. And the last one is trigograph. So trigograph is another very big pain, because a lot of students spend a lot of time on it and they are having troubles like, I need to move up, move down, shift, squeeze, that kind of thing. So many things. Okay, but there's actually a very standard way of doing things. So you just need to know how to do it. Okay, I like to call this drawing a pseudograph. This is something that I learned in secondary school from my tuition teacher, which was a really, really powerful technique. So basically break down the equation to start to the really very simple. So I'll give you an example. Maybe y equals to cosine 2x plus 1. What I will sketch first is y equals to cosine x. That's the first thing I'll do. Then I will put in the period of 2. Y equals to cosine 2x. And I'll sketch it on the same diagram, so that when I check back, I know, okay, I've done my period 2. So that is my period 2 graph. Then I will do the plus 1. So I can see all these step-by-step processes in the graph. So I know I'm on the right track. And you start from the very, very basics, because the basics are there. You will never, ever remove away from the basics of the questions. So that's how I teach students to do sketching of graph questions. And the last topic, the one that I think, also a lot of students hate, because at least half the paper, or at least half the syllabus of your O-level paper will be on this major topic called calculus. So that is where your differentiation, your integration comes in, and your kinematics come in. So differentiation inside has like 5 subtopics, integration has 3, kinematics has 1. And every single question type will be tested. unfortunately. Okay, but good news is that a lot of things are also very standard. Let's say, for example, increasing function. Once you see that keyword, I teach my students to identify keywords. Once you see increasing function, just on the question paper straight away, right? Dy dx greater than 0. And then you start. You just need to differentiate, greater than 0, solve. And you're done. Rate or change. Ask yourself, what do you want to get out? If the question say rate of increase of radius, okay, my goal is dr dt. That is what I need. Then stationary points, dy dx equals to 0. These kind of really, really very obvious markers, always try to underline them, write them in your question, especially for those kind of questions that are super long, and in Emath as well. So I know that the longer the question, the more scary it is. Actually, it's not true. This is actually a myth. To me personally, the longer the question, the better. Why? They give you more information. They give you more numbers. They give you more things to work with. The shorter your question, the more things you need to pull out from yourself, the more things that you actually need to recall and everything. So this is me. Always underline the very, very important things in the question, because all the information that you need is in there. Yeah, so that is for Emath.
Like legit some golden advice that I wish I had when I was a student. So I just wanted to elaborate on a few points that you mentioned. So I think firstly is like, is okay, if you're thinking of how to approach math, right? If you hate math, okay, for example, cannot speak from parents' perspective because they love math. Okay, what if you hate math, right? So I think don't approach math as a subject that you need to grind. I think you need to grind, but I feel like a lot of times actually math can be quite fun too. Okay, for certain reasons, because what you're essentially doing is you're trying to solve a piece of puzzle, right? So imagine the question give you clues, okay, they give you sort of like a roadmap in terms of how to derive an answer. So you're just picking out those signposts and those information and putting them together to figuring out your solution. So sometimes when I was practicing math, I try to treat it more like a game, I'm trying to solve a puzzle. Then it makes it a lot more challenging and a lot more enticing, because when you sit down for your paper, it's gonna be like how long? 2 hours, right? If I'm not wrong. So it's going to be quite a while, right? So I'm trying to put myself as if I'm going for like a quiz show, and then I'm just trying to solve the different sets of problems that are given to me. Other than that, I think the cool thing about math is sometimes they already give you the answer because they ask you to prove, right? For example, trigo identity. So I think the interesting part is that the answer is already given. It's just whether you're able to derive the answer. There's no other subject that has that, right? You take your English paper, they don't give you a model answer. Right? You take science, they don't tell you what's the correct answer to. So math is the only subject whereby you can 100% guarantee that your answer is correct, right? So that in itself is just, so what's there for you to do is really to figure out the means of getting to the end. So I think that's what can be the way you think about math and how you can make it slightly more fun. And I think going back to Amath, I think there's a lot of seemingly very complicated concepts, especially when you compare against Emath, because Emath is quite real. It's like real world problems. How do you calculate interest? How do you calculate? I forgot what I already did, but I remember Emath to be a very fun foundational kind of math. And when you take the leap to Amath, you realize that a lot of things don't make sense. Like, why the hell do I need to learn binomial theorem, right? Like, that doesn't apply to my daily life. But I think that's where the challenge of math isn't lying in the fact that, okay, will I really use logarithm? I never ever use logarithm in my life. But it's also the mental process of making sure that your mind is trained to be sharp enough to solve problems when you're given a set of rules and functions. So I think that's the beauty of math in terms of how it trains you to be a problem solver in a very logical manner. So take math positively and have that vision of what math is trying to teach you. And then I think that's when you really gain a lot of value learning math itself. I wouldn't say the value is in logarithm itself, but it's how you use to solve problems, So I think that's the interesting part about math. Okay, but enough on the math portion about things. I want to talk more about exams and time management as well. So right now, the timeline is in June, right? We don't have that much time. In 2 to 3 months, we're taking our prelims. Very soon, okay, for Sec 3, it will be end of year. And before you know it, for the Sec 4s, you're taking an O-level. So let's talk a little bit about exam tips and time management as well. So can you share with us what are some important exam tips students must know when they enter the exam hall? And how should they manage their time completing the papers?
So to answer this question, let me break it down into both E and A, because personally, I have different strategies for both papers. So let's talk about Emath first. So, okay, this is something that I tell my students as well. So I usually set a ridiculous time for students to actually try to complete their papers. So, okay, I know it's going to sound weird, but I usually tell students to complete the paper 1 in 1 hour and 15 minutes, even though you're given 2 hours. Okay, so the rest of the 45 minutes is for you to check. But of course, this little tidbit here is only for people that are really, really very, very good. And you know that the fast as how fast you go, you're as accurate. So please do not ever forgo that accuracy. Do not go so fast you chong through the whole paper, but in the middle you make so many careless mistakes. It's not worth it. I rather you slowly, step by step, every single question, make sure you get it right so that you do not need to go back to that same question again. And that's really important. Another thing also, so something that I find out about after researching a lot of math papers and reading a lot of math papers, I realized that teachers love to put the difficult questions at the start and in the middle. Why? Because they know students have this particular mentality. Once they reach a question that they cannot do, they start to internally panic. And at the back of the mind, as you continue on, right, you start to think, oh my God, I cannot do that question. Oh my God, I cannot do. So you start to worry and worry and worry. So as you move on to the even simpler questions, right, that little worry will cause you to panic, will cause you to make little mistakes. So personally, what I do is that, okay, I also do have that problem, to be very fair. I also have that little panicky thing in me. Once I see a question that I cannot do, I start to sweat, my whole hand start to get wet and everything. It's very fair. Okay, so what I personally do is that actually before I start a paper, I won't chong and start the paper. I'll actually read every single question first. So there are 22 questions in the paper, 23 even. I'll just read. Okay, I know I can do this. I know I can do this. I know I can do this. Those questions I know that I most likely cannot do or I struggle a little bit, ignore first. So you just tell yourself, okay, I'm not going to read question 6 anymore. I'm going to keep that to the last. So I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So you do all those that you're super confident and when you are the freshest of your mind. Okay, and another thing. So usually math papers are in the morning. Have a good night rest. That is super important, especially for math. You need that good night rest. Do not cram until 2, 3 a.m. memorizing formulas. That is not necessary. Math is about practice. Okay, so that's for Emath. Now let's move on to A. Okay, so for me, oh yeah, sorry, I forgot to mention one more thing. For Emath paper 2, okay, I know there's that scary graphing question, which will take like 15, 20 minutes to sketch the graphing question. So for a 2.5 hour paper, I usually tell my students to finish the paper within 1 hour, 45 minutes. Give yourself 45 minutes to check and really spend the time to check. Not go toilet, walk anyhow, walk around, that kind of thing. Really spend the amount of time to check. So the graphing question, personally, I will always do first because graphing questions is something that I can bang it out fast and I can get it done very clean, very accurate. Then I start the rest of the topics. So this is me personally. But do what is comfortable to you. If you know you are very, very strong in probability, do the probability question first. If you think that you are really strong at graph, do the graph question first. Do your strengths first, then move on to things that you are not so confident in. That is really, really very important. And it's a very important exam strategy. Okay, so let's move on to Amath. So for Amath, personally, what I do is same thing. I read through all 10 to 11 questions first, and I start to identify, okay, this is a topic here, this topic here, this topic here. Okay, and what I actually do is that on the question paper, I'll write down what concept it is straight away. So when I see that, okay, this is a discriminant question, I'll just write prescribe minus 4AC there. So I know, in case I panic later, I just need to read my little hint, then I know, okay, this is automatically discriminant. So I don't need to be scared about it anymore because I've already solved that little algorithm that I need. So I do that for every single question. And they give you if I'm not wrong, it's 2.5 hours. It's a lot of time to finish an AMF paper. Use that whole full 2.5 hours of paper and present good work for your examiners. You're never ever going to see your answer booklet anymore for the rest of your life. Present the best solutions that you can ever give for your examiners. And also a few things, the very, very basic. Write neatly, write legibly. This is so that you please the examiner. Don't give them like so scrawny handwriting. Make numbers 6 look like a 9, 0 look like a 9, that kind of thing. And it makes the life so difficult for examiners. Always be neat. Always be very systematic in the way you do things. And I think it's a really good thing because currently right now, the syllabus has been done in a way where you no longer use foolscap. So during our time, we actually, for the paper 2s, all need to use foolscap. And then for Amath, both also on foolscap. And that's when you see students submit 15 sheets of paper. Then you submit 3, then you get scared. Wow, the students submit 15, I submit 3. That's scary. No longer that anymore. Now everything is written on the question paper. And that is really good because this means that you can do at your own pace. You can do whichever question you want first. I can choose to start in the middle. I can choose to start at the start. So it's honestly going into the exam, knowing your strengths and weaknesses. And then from there, you move on to get your A.
you're listening, if you're not taking down notes, you should. I think those are really things that will really help you out in the exam itself. And I think the cool thing is most of this advice doesn't just apply to math. I think it definitely applies to science as well. So let's do a quick recap on some of the points. I just want to add on a little bit on those. So we know that in an exam, the questions cannot be all difficult. There's going to be hard, level, medium, and easy questions. So how you should look at an exam when it comes to you, right, is you need to understand the reason why there are different levels of difficulty in a single paper is because they're trying to eventually bell curve you according to students that get A1, your Bs and your Cs and so on. So the easy questions are those that everybody can solve. So this is where you get the bulk of the population to pass the paper, right? And if you're able to solve moderately difficult questions, that's when you get a B. And those that are able to score the A is because they're able to do the most difficult questions. Now, I just want to give you a scenario here and you just visualize that. Imagine that on the floor, right, there's $50 notes, okay? There's 20 of them, okay? Are you going to pick the easiest one first, or are you going to start taking the one that's furthest away from you and the hardest? You naturally start taking the $50 notes that are closest to you, those that are easiest, not in like dangerous places, but those that you can easily reach for. Okay, so what I'm trying to advocate here and for you to understand is that in an exam is as much a strategy as much as it is whether you're able to do the paper. See, the smarter students, they don't think of the question paper as question 1 to question 20. They look at it as there are 20 questions. Nobody is dictating that you have to start from question 1 and end with question 20, right? Because the questions are there. The order in which you do it, the person that decides is yourself. So what you should do is to get as many marks as you can for those questions that you definitely can solve. You secure yourself that baseline of B4, B3. So even if you don't do the remaining difficult questions, you know at the end of the day, you will get nothing lesser than a B3. After that, that's when you have the extra time, right? That's when you invest your time and your remaining brain cells to solve those questions that you might not have even been able to solve in the first place. So why burn so much brain cells solving those questions that you couldn't and leaving yourself either no time or no energy left to do those questions that you're able to? So I think the baseline here is go and secure the marks that you can secure and work towards the A1. So think of it as a progressive thing. So this is what we call exam strategy. And this is something that if nobody's telling you and you're listening in here, be smart, okay? Be exam smart. So sometimes you need to let go of your ego, because I had this issue in the past. I feel like, okay, I can solve every single question 1 to 20. So when I get stuck on question 4, right, I insist on solving question 4 because I feel like I'm supposed to be able to solve this. And then I just dig myself and then I go down this rabbit hole and I find out that, hey, actually I spent half an hour trying to solve this question and I still didn't get an answer. So what was the point in that? I could have easily just moved on from this question, complete the rest, get my A2 minimum, and then come back to the boss question to see whether I can get the A1 again. So that is a smart way of doing it. And I want to make sure that we convey this very clearly. All right. Other than that, so we were talking about this idea of hints. So Kaiwan say if this is a discriminant question, you write your B squared minus 4AC. In fact, I teach my students the same thing in science. So the very first thing I ask my students to do when they do a chemistry paper is that the very first thing they write is that they start writing down. So when they say you may start now, immediately they take out their pen, they write down the metal reactivity series. Okay, why do I make them do so? It's because no matter what paper you take, paper 1, paper 2, paper 3, doesn't matter. There will always be a chapter on metals because it will always come up. Which means if it comes out, you'll definitely need one thing. You'll need the reactivity series. So what I do is I make them write down a certain number of things, maybe 5 to 6 items in 30 seconds, which they should be able to, because every time when I make them practice, they will do the same technique. So this is the base set of information, the clues and the hints that they will need to solve the question later on. So the moment they write that down, the moment they write down their insoluble salts, they never have to worry about forgetting it, because those are the things you need to memorize. There's no way around it. Like, you have to remember your acronym, then you have to apply it, right? So once they have it with them, nothing can stop them already. That's when they start using their brain cells to solve questions. So it's very important for you to start when you get a piece of paper, right? Like Haiwan said, right? Don't start straight away. Don't start on question 1. Okay? What you do is to look through the entire paper, do a quick breakdown. You don't even need a minute or two. In fact, you have too much time most of the time in the exam, right? You're at the last few minutes, you're just playing your pencil or staring at your friend. Okay, so what you should do at the very start of paper is to do a quick breakdown and understand what the challenge of this paper entails, and then you approach it strategically. So this applies for history and English as well. For example, before you start an essay, you don't just jump straight into it, right? You plan out your essay, you understand the structure in which you want to hit, and then, or you can plan out your PEL when you're doing your SVQs, for example. So I'm just drawing reference to other subjects that you might be more familiar with. So as per any subject, you need a strategy. If you don't have that strategy and enter the exam hall, you're bound to get burned. All right. So I think we shared a lot of valuable tips here, but I just want to round out this podcast with asking Kaiwan a very straightforward question. So if a student right now, they're still failing or they're not getting their desired grade for math, what is the fastest way they can do to improve their math?
So personally, if let's say you're really, really struggling right now, personally what I will do is I'll take the textbook, go inside and start figuring out what are all the very, very key concepts. And usually the textbooks are already designed in a way where they tell you what are important. Then they'll just dump you a lot of questions and examples. Fish out those really, really very important concepts first and organize them onto a piece of paper. Then from there, okay, this is what I do. I'll just try to memorize. If you're really, really struggling very, very badly now, start to memorize all these techniques. Start to memorize like, okay, B square minus 4AC is this, B square minus 4AC is that, this is that, this is that. Start to memorize this. And as you do it every single night, it will start to go in. And you will really, this kind of memory techniques, right, actually does help for math as well. Okay, so don't think of it as math is like, it's not 100% practice. It's also have to do a little bit of memory work as well. I would say like 5 to 10% of memory work, 90% of the bulk is still practicing. So right now, as of right now, in 14th of June, or of when we are recording this, okay, so what I would say is that start taking prelim papers, start going through, and choose those schools that you know categorically are slightly easier. Do not choose schools that you know personally like, oh, super difficult, and go and demoralize yourself with the school paper. Please don't do that. Choose those schools that you know that are at your level and you know that you can successfully complete at least 70% of the paper. Try to do that first. Then after that, try to find as many resources as possible. Example questions, textbook questions, online. There's so many resources all over the place. And you know, math, you can find literally questions all over the place. You just need to Google quadratic equations and a bunch load will just come out of nowhere. And just practice. Yeah. So just practicing the techniques are really, really very important. And you will slowly start to realize that as you practice and practice and practice and practice and practice, the more you get to understand like, hey, I've seen this question before. Hey, I know how to do that. And you get that sense of achievement. And I think that's something really very important. It's all about going into the exam and really getting that satisfaction that, hey, I can do. Or, hey, I look at this question, I know how to do it. And you do feel a little bit good about yourself. And this is why I love math. Because you know that once you get to the final result, you get it right, you're like, yes, I solved it. Yes, I've got the answer. And this is something that I hope that everyone gets to experience. So it's really very, very important. So if you are really struggling right now, trust me, try to go for that. Try to get that feeling of, yes, I did it. Try your very, very, very best. Focus on it. Because math is honestly something that everyone can do. There's no such thing as saying like, oh, I'm not gifted in math, or I have no talent in math. That's not true. You just need to practice. And trust me, if you are saying that you do not have enough time to practice, think about it. At that moment when you're saying that sentence, you can be doing a question already. You can be using those additional time to actually go and practice. So please, practice, practice, practice. Yeah.
To sum it off, I just wanted to share something. For math, right, I completely agree with Kaiwan. There isn't whether you can do math or you couldn't. In fact, right, out of all the subjects that you're taking at O level, right, the single subject where you can make the biggest improvement, the largest stride in, right, is math. Because math is a hardworking kind of subject, which is the more work you put in, the more foundation you build, the more questions you do, naturally you'll get better at it. So there is no running away from it. If you're not good at math, right, the good chance is that you haven't practiced enough, right? So I had friends that were failing both math in June, right? But then by the time they took their prelims, they're getting A1 and A2. And the secret wasn't that they suddenly got smarter or suddenly got better at math. It's just that they put in the work and they really go and do the practices and they got better. So there are obviously ways that, like as Kaiwan has shared earlier, on how you can approach each chapter more smartly, but I think at a baseline, it doesn't run away from putting in the work and trying out the practices. Okay, so for everyone out there that you're struggling with math or you really want to ace your math, I hope that we have dropped you some key insights to help you with that progress. And as usual, Overmark is really here to be part of your journey, working alongside you towards your O levels. So I hope today whatever we shared has been of help to you. So with that, we come to the end of the group chat. So do follow us on Spotify. If you're watching this on YouTube, give us a like, subscribe so that you'll get updates on the latest video. And with that, we'll see you in the next podcast. Bye everyone.
It sound right, boy.